Well, let me tell you how this film came about. I was in the Navy in the Second World War. I was on a landing ship tank. I was in the North African campaign in 1943, and then I was in the first wave of the invasions of Sicily and Salerno in Italy. And then we went up to England for the Normandy invasion, and we were in the first LST wave at Omaha Beach. You'll hear this again in the film. We went back for a second load, and on this trip back, we were torpedoed by some German torpedo boats, and I was saved by a boat from a British destroyer, HMS Beagle. Beagle, that's a nice name. Well, you'll see all of that. But the point is that 33 years later, I met the young officer who had been in command of the small boat. And this is how that happened. An enterprising petty officer on Beagle looked in the ship's log and saw the names of the American Navy officers. And he wrote to the Navy Department to get our addresses. Can you imagine that? And then he wrote us letters, and the letters said, Beagle had reunions, and we were not forgotten. Well, in 1976, 1977, I was director of the London part of the Arts of London and Florence program of the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. And on D-Day, we were in London, and on D-Day, I called this petty officer and said, thank you again, I'm in London. He said, well, that's fortuitous. We're about to have another reunion, and we'd like you to come. And I'll send you the information. So information came, and it included the line, women folk may pick up their men folk after 10 o'clock. Well, that seemed to me to mean two things, that my wife, who's sitting right there, wasn't invited, and second, we'd probably all be dead drunk. Well, I got dressed up in my best English suit, and my wife wrote my name, address, and phone number and put it in my pocket. And the reunion was in an old training ship moored in the Thames up by Blackfriars, if any of you know London. And so I went there, and I entered, and there was a large room, and men were sitting around drinking, and they were the ratings, the sailors. And then over by the bar was a group of men, and they were the officers. So I went over, and I introduced myself, and one of them said, well, tell us the circumstances of your rescue. So I told them, and then one man said, well, I was in command of that small boat when that happened, and we weren't dead drunk, but afterwards he said, well, come out with me and we'll have raspberries and cream at a famous hotel that had been a rendezvous for officers in both world wars. And we went there, and that was the start of becoming fast friends. We had a flat in London, and we always visited them. They were so good to us. His children played music for us. They were all musicians. Very unusual Navy. He was a regular Navy officer. And then they came to Colorado to visit us. And on the last night, you'll see, we had a conversation. And that's the central basis of this film. Now, there's one other thing I want to say about it. After I showed it to a group of alumni groups, one was in St. Louis, and one of the people there was John Levis. Where is he? I just saw him a minute.
Oh, right behind you. Lurking behind you.
Oh, he's lurking. There he is. And that was a long time ago. And then a few years ago, he called out of nowhere and said, I think that film should have a broader showing. Would you let me give it to a filmmaker, a prize-winning filmmaker that I know, who might take your amateur film and make it into something which could be shown more broadly, perhaps on PBS. And I was nervous about that because I wanted to tell the story without romanticizing it, without Greatest Generation, just to tell the story. And I met this filmmaker, Chris Farina, and we came to an understanding. He was very sensitive to what my interests were, and he made the film. Now, at the moment, he's working on it because John Levis, who can arrange anything, has arranged to have it on St. Louis PBS just before Veterans Day. But in order to do that, he had to cut it down to 29 minutes, and that was hard. And so I took what he did, and then with the help of Dan Winsek, I don't know if he's here, from our audiovisual, he and I did some serious work on it for the last couple of weeks, and it's now about 37 minutes. And I'll be anxious to see what you think, whether I told the story without heroics, without World War II heroics, which I did not want to do. So that's the story. This is the story of the sinking of my ship in the Normandy invasion in the Second World War. I was a junior officer on USS LST-376, a landing ship tank. My ship arrived in the Mediterranean in 1943 during the last stages of the North African campaign. We were in the first LST waves in the invasions of Sicily and at Salerno in Italy. Then we sailed to England to prepare for the Normandy landings. LST-376 was part of the armada of ships that crossed the English Channel to France early in June 1944. On D-Day, we delivered tanks and trucks to Omaha Beach. Then we returned to England for a second load. On the trip back to France, our group of 5 LSTs was intercepted by German E-boats, fast torpedo boats. My ship and another LST were hit by their torpedoes. The battle-scarred LST-376 was soon burning and exploding from bow to stern. I was lucky to be fished out of the frigid waters of the English Channel by a small boat from a British destroyer, HMS Beagle. 33 years later, I met the man who had been a sub-lieutenant on Beagle, Colin McMillan, the young officer in command of the small boat that saved me. Colin and I became fast friends, and he and his wife Lavender visited us in Colorado. On the last night of the visit, I spoke with Colin about that night in the Channel when we first met, with my video camera watching and listening. Our conversation is the basis for this little video. I made the film to preserve the memory of my shipmates, living, breathing men who were drowned, burned, crushed, frozen, when our ship was torpedoed. My shipmates were young. They wanted to live as much as I did. Boys and young men caught in an immense human tragedy that cut off youth and life. Cullen died a few years ago. The film is in his honor, too.
I thought we might recall a little bit the events of that dreadful night when we first made our acquaintance, the night of the 9th of June, 1944, because it's harder and harder to recall those things, and I thought in talking about it we might remember together some of the things that happened that night. It doesn't really slip away from me. In fact, I have images of it that seem as clear as they were many, many years ago. But I think I recall a number of things. One is that we were headed 5 LSTs in a line for France, having made the original invasion off Omaha Beach. And then we went back to Portland, Weymouth for another load. And we were proceeding through what was supposed to be a swept and clear channel, guarded by escort vessels on both sides. So we had no escort vessel with us. And then, as darkness began to fall, your ship appeared and requested permission to join our little convoy. And that was our salvation, as it turned out. And Beagle took its place at the head of the line of the 5 LSTs. You must correct me if I'm your
Sure.
correction.
Yeah, that's fine.
Different.
Norman Murch, our captain, when he saw 5 American LSTs unescorted except for 2 MLs, that's 2 motor launches, he offered to escort them, which was a polite way of saying you need some protection. Our duty was to intercept E-boats trying to attack our shipping crossing the channel to the invasion beaches.
And then I remember that I was off watch at midnight and was awakened from sleeping by an explosion, which I knew was either a depth charge or a bomb in the water. That is something that shook the ship. And I swung out of my bunk in a practice I had learned again and again down in the Mediterranean in the early years of the war, when we had no particular air cover and had 4 or 5 German air raids every day. That is, I reached for a flashlight behind my bedlight, swung into my trousers, which were hanging from a hanger from the overhead, put my feet in a pair of slippers on the deck, buckled on the life belt, which was hanging on a curtain rod by the door of my room, grabbed a helmet from a hook in the passageway, and ran for the bridge in Conning Tower where my And as I ran, I heard our ship was hit. No, our ship was hit just before my feet hit the deck. But as I ran, I heard a terrible rush of water, and the ship listed severely, and I thought it was going over, and I remember smelling cordite, that acrid smell. And when I got up to the bridge, the tanks and trucks the trucks with ammunition and gasoline on the top deck were going up in a huge ammunition fire, and my impression was that everybody there was dead. And somehow I got out the side door of the wheelhouse and went aft, and a sailor thrust another K-Pop life jacket in my hands, which I put on, and I jumped. And I remember feeling the shock of the cold water, and my slippers slipped from my feet, and I had the impression that they were going down into a bottomless deep.
As far as I can recall, I also was off watch. I think I went off watch at midnight. We were working watch on, watch off. As I recall it, there was a damn great explosion, and we went to action stations, which is the way we rely on waking everybody up. Of course, we have alarm rattlers, which make fantastic noise. I got onto the bridge fairly quickly. The German attack, which had just taken place, was quite clever. They came in and they realized that Beagle was at the front, and there was only a couple of MLs bringing up the rear. I never heard subsequently what happened to the MLs. They just vanished. I never saw them again. But the Germans attacked from opposite sides. The Germans came in from either side, and they fired torpedoes from either side, and they got your ship, and they got the fifth ship. They missed the fourth, and they didn't attack the first and the second. Well, if I'd been in the German shoes, I would have thought that that was a very good way of attacking that sort of a convoy with a destroyer in action. Murchie's problem was that his clear duty was to do all he could to destroy these E-boats. That's why we were there. And so in a matter of a few seconds, he turned to me and he said, "Sub, you take the whaler. I'll drop you and see how many people you can pick up." So we had what amounts to the cry of a weighed lifeboat's crew. I went down in the whaler. The ship went off very fast. And I had this extraordinary experience of watching my own ship fight a night action, which was conducted with star shell, pom-pom, star shell, and our main armament of 4-inch guns.